It has evolved and is now very dangerous because this colonialism extends to consciousness. The information, which is spread very quickly by the media, shapes public opinion. Now, it's no longer the markets that shape the information, but the information that shapes the markets. Such is the change. If you think in French, if you receive French information, your personality will be distorted and your identity troubled. Do Western elites instrumentalize this conflict? Of course they do. And why? What is it about? It turns out that the Congo is one of the poorest countries in Africa, while also being one of the richest in terms of resources. The political administration and economic leadership were completely replaced. Let's look at these three countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso.
If you are African and closely following the situation in the DRC, don't think that you are the only ones doing so. Russia is very attentive to the situation. In the next segment, you will hear the testimony of Irina Abramova, a doctor in economic sciences and a university professor. In her story, she exposes the interests of Westerners in RTC. She talks about how they profit from this war. She takes care to provide a bit of history to shed light on her narrative. Follow. They have shaken the world. We're here. Open up, please, right now. What's going on? I'll just talk about it a bit later.
You might be surprised, but at the last Valdai Club meeting in Sochi, I was able to ask President Vladimir Putin a question. On the topics discussed by all the African leaders he met regarding what they expect from Russia.
Everyone, what want?
The president mentioned two things: security, how to ensure it, the fight against conflicts and terrorism on one hand, and training on the other. Because all the current well-being of the West, its rapid progress and technological development are based on plundering. First of all, let's talk about the plundering of Africa. For example, the United States never formally colonized Africa. But what was the basis of the primitive accumulation of American capital? It's the exploitation of slaves in the cotton plantations of the southern states. How many slaves were taken? We don't talk about it much. We're talking about 15 million slaves. How so? 15 million, excuse me? According to various estimates, at least 5 times more, maybe 100 million were taken. These people died on the way. Their bodies were stacked in the ships. This means that Africa has lost its best genetic base. The youngest, the strongest, and the healthiest who had been taken on board. Does anyone remember it today? The Africans remember.
The young, the strongest, the wisest.
Let's remember what Leopold II was doing in the former Zaire, today the Democratic Republic of the Congo. When he declared that the entire country was his personal property. And during the rubber exploitation to save on cardboard, they used human skin for drying. The rubber was applied to the skin and then removed. If the Congolese didn't work well on the plantations, they would have their hands cut off. Then it was found that it wasn't profitable to kill the labor force, and they started cutting off the hands and feet of their wives and children. After that, the enlightened European monarch, Leopold II, opened a human zoo in Brussels, which continued to exist even in the 20th century. That's normal. Of course, the Africans remember. I'm not even talking about the huge natural resources that the British, the French, the Portuguese, and the Spanish exported from Africa during the colonial period. In the early days, these countries were plundered. People were treated like animals. They love to talk a lot about the civilizing role of the West. But I remind you of what I already said. They did bring civilization, but only for themselves. They built houses. But who lived in those houses? Africans? No. It was the colonizers themselves who lived in them, the French, for example.
Something from our first at the quartet?
There were 2 types of colonialism. The British colonialism was different from that of the French. British colonialism was done by proxy. What were they doing? They were more cunning. The English are generally more cunning. They kept the local elites and bribed them. When they colonized a country, they paid a little money to the local chiefs, kings, and others to represent the interests of Great Britain. In fact, they were just figureheads. The British did whatever they wanted behind their